Matt in the chat. Okay, we're getting there.
Hey.
Hey.
How are you guys doing?
We're good. I'm just kind of like celebrating the merge on Twitter. Pretty crazy day.
It's wild out here. Pretty much summer proving to be not a chill time at all, but live and direct.
No, it's crazy. It's also cool because the merge is called the Girly Merge, which seems like a reference to Görlitzer Park, which is around where I was staying when I first heard about Ethereum. So everything's coming full circle.
It's all connected.
Apparently. How are you all
Amazing.
doing? It's been a minute.
So good.
So good. So I mean, this is like the squad, the four of us up here again. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm enjoying your All Stars avatar.
Oh, thank you. That was a gift from Vivian, who's actually in the audience right now, for my birthday. But the
Wonderful.
All Stars is very cute. Thank you.
Super cute.
Where are you guys calling in from today?
We're both in Berlin, but we're in separate rooms, separate buildings.
Yeah, I'm in the studio and Holly's in the home studio. Because the thing is, like, we live together and work together, so we have to have two separate spaces to go, because otherwise it would just get even crazier.
Oversaturated.
Yeah.
So, good division. Yeah, we're gonna kick this way off. Apologies for the interruptions, but proper introductions are in order. For those of you just tuning in, this is New Arrivals, Foundation's weekly chance to get in with amazing, fantastic, charismatic characters in our crew and greater creator community, collectors and beyond. We're joined today by a very special set. I think we spoke like maybe a little over a year ago, but well overdue for a catch back up. Charles and Kit here from Foundation taking over for this special edition as we're all rejumbling and jambling, and excited to welcome Matt and Holly to the stage, who can speak a little bit more about themselves here in a second, but need little introduction, but have been such a fantastic force here at Foundation and Web3 beyond, podcasting, media, accompanying, music making, thought leading in so many different ways. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you guys. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Charles. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really lovely to be here. Yeah, it's lovely to be here and yeah, reconnect. It's been a minute.
As we're some of us separated by countries and different rooms and long distances, we've just felt so bonded to kind of journeys that we've watched you guys go through. Obviously, it began very early at Foundation that we had the luck of working together after lots of years in music, just media at large that you guys are all front of, coming to Foundation and having kind of a Foundation V1 collection of work that works so well, debuting a collection with Foundation at the beginning of our collections product that's now alive and well, and just seeing you evolve and utilize that alongside DAOs and lots of other work you have going on. We're just going to get into all that today, but yeah, we are here to like just ask generally to start off, what's on your mind? What's been keeping you guys busy in the future vision? What are you thinking about lately? What's the weather like in Berlin? How is life hitting you right now?
Well, Europe is experiencing a bit of a heat wave, so it's hot, and there's no such thing as air conditioning here. So we're kind of like sweating it out. But in terms of work, we're thinking we're continuing to work on the Holly Plus project, which, if you're not familiar with that, we've been kind of playing around with ideas around digital identity and using machine learning tools, kind of co-create and share some of my own digital identity assets with other people so that they can make work through me and as me. So we released a series of NFTs several months ago around that, using the first version of the Holly Plus voice. And in 2 weeks, we're premiering our first ever kind of like live show Holly Plus performance in Helsinki as part of Helsinki Festival, which is going to be super weird and exciting, where Mas is actually performing as me with like an amazing mocap, full on digital avatar suit from Team Sam Rolfs, and a new kind of naturalistic version of the Holly Plus voice. So we're kind of nervous and excited to premiere that in a couple weeks, and we're continuing to release uh, self portraits as part of the classified through foundation. So we started that last year. We limited the contract to 80, and I think we're at 46 now. So as the tools kind of develop and mutate, we continue to release things along those lines. I love the Holly emojis that are up there right now. So I love this idea of being able to create kind of custom emojis in your own likeness. So yeah, that's one thing. And then Matt, maybe you want to talk about what you've been cooking up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, on top of that, I mean, it's kind of funny because, a lot of our focus for the past 6 or so years has been on machine learning and AI generation stuff. And what's kind of cool and maybe like too much all at once is that obviously post DALL-E 2 and now Stable Diffusion and people get excited about Midjourney, there's way more of a conversation about that. So like, I think that's really cool. It's really cool to look back on some of the work. I mean, the first collection that we did with you all, the Crossing the Interface, was a piece of work made around that, classifieds around that. We also did a new collection called Infinite Images, which are experiments that we were working on actually with DALL-E 1 last year. So these kind of way larger works.
I think these are the only ones that are out there of DALL-E 1. I don't want to say a falsehood, but I think these are the only ones that I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly like, yeah, they're very special, and it was kind of, we didn't know at the time that the term has come up now, which is outpaint, which is like working with small, it's kind of a small focus to make really large images. But that's what we spent most of the last winter doing, was trying to figure out how to take these image generators and make really, really large works. And the trick is developing some tricks to try and make them coherent too, so you produce these coherent images. So you can see them on the Infinite Images collection that we posted. And then I guess the other thing that we're kind of working on, which is kind of the sum total of all of this work, is thinking about some of the crypto principles of ownership and self-custody. We're going to be soon starting an organization to help living artists, to actually be able to experiment with training models and making a living from in this kind of AI art era. There's been a lot of interesting discourse recently where people are kind of worried about seeing these tools appear, but there's not too many, I'd say, positive visions for how this is all going to shake out. And so, a lot of the work we've been doing has been about Holly experimenting with her IP, making art with other people using her IP, like allowing for other people to make art as her. And so we're looking to actually standardize and kind of release those tools for people. So yeah, so if there's any, I see a lot of artists in the group, if there's anybody who's interested in maybe experimenting around that stuff, now would probably be the time to hit us up. Because yeah, I think beyond anything, the one thing you can say is that there aren't too many artists who are being represented maybe in the way in which this kind of tech is going, and everyone wants to avoid the really sticky topic of like permissions and permissions and IP, and we have like a very, very positive vision of where this is going to go. I think there's no reason to be scared. There's reason to be excited, but at some point someone has to do that work. So we're spending a lot of time working with collaborators to try and set up some infrastructure to really advocate for artists in that. I appreciate that that's a lot. On a day-to-day basis, it all makes sense. On a day-to-day basis, it's basically all the same thing, but it's like it has many arms and legs.
It's beautiful, and what a spectrum there. I think it's a wonderful summary of every side that Kit and I will get into. A rough agenda for our conversation.
Yeah, literally just laid it out.
It's gonna get there, though. We'll make sure. And maybe to just come back all the way to the beginning as we eventually will, I think, hit on, yeah, as you say, like artistic AI, sustainability, creative futures, and connectivity between all these different worlds of yours. So beautiful. Can we take it all the way back to Berlin? I just want to hear in a general, like, it's been so long since we caught up. How's it been in Berlin? Obviously, you guys have had this like sort of American come German interaction, obviously with the worlds of crypto media and Web3. How is that all summarizing? Like, how is it feeling being over there? How connective? How's everything transferred since we last spoke? How's it been out there?
Well, I guess everyone's has felt the kind of burn a little bit of the economy and the market kind of, whatever's going on with that. But I mean, we come from like a really strong art community in Berlin. And so it's just kind of like, I don't know, things people just keep making work. Things kind of carry on and it's summer. And so people are in a good mood. And I don't know, I mean, I'm very heartened to see people continuing to experiment and do weird stuff and think bigger and doing really ambitious, cool projects. So yeah, honestly, in Berlin, it feels really good and really active.
Amazing. I don't know when one of you is answering and the other isn't. I want to create time for all the answers, but I know despite being in different rooms, you guys share lots of sentiments. So please just interrupt. As we say, new arrivals, very casual conversation. If you don't like any questions, kick them back. We're here for whatever's clever. I did also want to just tap into like the scholastic kind of academic roots that you guys all come from, because I think it's such an important layer of like how and where you derive a lot of your visions. But Matt, like via the work with NYU, and Holly, obviously, like go all the way back to like roots in America. How are you guys sensing like the worlds of academia and Web3 and just that whole perception to how you've been? I also want to ask, like, how is the music world perceiving what you've been working on? Because I think obviously you guys are really front runners in terms of these conversations. Like you're at the blistering edge of everything, but also like I think connecting these back to these traditional models and universes that kind of we all came from. How's that been? How are you guys sensing people are taking up to this new venture that you've kind of escapaded on?
I think generally most people are cautiously curious. I think, obviously with COVID, like last year was a lot, for many different reasons. And, with COVID and uncertainty and crazy market activity and, some people struggling and other people like really, really not struggling, there was just like, it was all a bit too much. And I think my feeling is that things have quietened down a little bit. There's a lot of people who are just cautiously curious about, what's on offer, like how to interact. I still do feel a little like it's still kind of early. Like there's a lot of people I think kind of waiting for permission. It didn't really help that, the NFT moment turned into a bit of a culture war, and people are just generally burned out in life. But beyond that, I mean, the one thing I can say is like, yeah, I was teaching a class at NYU for years. I've actually stopped doing that now, even though I love the program. My experience when like talking to younger artists, people from the age of 18 to 22 or whatnot who were in that, I think I may have taught the first ever class, like an example, because it was like 3 days after CryptoKitties. And like everyone is positive in a sense. Like a lot of people like came to the class, and the first time you bring up the topic, they kind of have arguments that they've heard, and then you address them and you talk about them openly. And then beyond that, you're just like, well, there are all these tools now for you to maybe tailor an economy around your work and maybe set your own terms. And, there's no right way to do it, because there's, 500 people out there today who are trying a different way to approach things. And over time, that argument wins out. Over time, that argument is just really compelling. Yeah. And I can say personally, I mean, my experience of, being quite mad about Web 2, I was never really satisfied with the options made available. Looking at the ecosystem now, where I'm like, okay, I see, there's like 50 projects a week that are spawning up, trying to address different things. Like we live in a different world in terms of, yeah, being able to set your own terms and like experiment with what your career or your art practice or whatnot looks like, and over time that will win, because there's nothing else going on. in honesty. I mean, that's the other side, is like, listening to playlists on Spotify has become this kind of rote activity. Like social media is this very rote kind of like almost you like open up the app and like it's like the same every day. I mean, it's just I don't really see another space where, with the exception maybe of some of the ML stuff that's happening, like I don't really see a space that's quite as dynamic. And so yeah, and so cautiously curious, cautiously curious. Yeah.
Matt, that's so resonant for many reasons. I've also felt similarly that there's this like that it feels like machine learning and Web3 are both sort of pushing the space forward. But I want to zoom back out for a second, back to education. You said something that really perked my ears and feels emblematic of both the work you and Holly do, which is that you feel like you taught one of the very, very first NFT classes. Knowing work for a really long time and knowing Holly's work for a really long time, I'm always intrigued. You both have this like, I feel like you're both able to like read the tea leaves of tech and of art and where it's going. And it's maybe a hard question to answer, but how has that skill been cultivated? Like, where does that intuition come from to know what to pursue in technology and art next? How do you find these threads and follow them?
Holly?
I'm curious to hear what you're going to say. I mean, for myself personally, I think, I feel like Matt and I, in a way, are kind of products of what we've been exposed to, like what communities we've been exposed to. We spent a long time in kind of Berlin art world. We have also spent a long time in the Bay Area. And so I feel like, just through those experiences, maybe that has helped give us access to specific people or specific ideas, or also help to kind of like break down certain preconceived notions that people even have, especially about technology. I mean, probably most of the people in this room don't fall into this, but a lot of artists that I know are extremely techno skeptical, and often for good reason. But I think having spent so much time in the Bay Area, we really got to see so many multiple sides of development, and so many kind of like weird subcultures, that I think it helped us. Maybe just because kind of subcultural communities, maybe that's what kind of tuned those sensors. Matt, what about you?
I think
Right.
that's kind of no, that's what I was going to say, is like, generally speaking, like both of us came up in very tightly knit musical subcultures, and as much as I like, if anything, the motivation to do that was, for me, always a curiosity to understand what people on the fringes were thinking and doing. And then over time, having lived in the Bay and like just being more curious about, I mean, let's be real, like the development of the internet has been the major cultural shift in our lifetime, right? Like beyond, beyond the development, there's certain musical styles that have maybe come a small distance in that time, but like the development of the internet has been probably the most dynamic field. And so like, I don't know, I mean, the one thing I'll give credit to is that I don't, in my mind, have ever valued an art, let's say a traditional artist's opinion more so than a developer's opinion. And so in social situations, or just in reading stuff, like I'll read blogs that developers write, and in order to try and understand the field, because it's kind of undoubtable that, like, and this was clear from very early on, it's like, it's kind of undoubtable that decisions made on a technical level have huge aesthetic and cultural ramifications. So why don't we analyze those and definitely of those in art schools or whatnot? That has never made any sense to me. And so I agree with Holly. It's just like, I've always been mostly just a culture person, and I don't privilege musical culture or gallery culture more than developer or hacker culture. And then if you're somewhat in between those and your eyes are open and you're kind of curious and like asking questions, then eventually you'll develop somewhat of an understanding of probably where things are going to go and like where you stand in that. And that's actually the most difficult thing to do, I think, is like it's not, I mean, it's not easy, but it's like somewhat, it's, you could write a book, you could write like instructions as to how to kind of get a rough impression of where things are going. Far more difficult is to actually figure out how you feel about it, and like what kind of work you want to make and what kind of role you want to play in that development. I think that part is like actually the really difficult part, and that's where you fall back on certain principles or certain ideas that you might have or have developed. I think that part is like actually the most crucial part.
I love that. I think that's also where, not to take it back to those sub communities, where music kind of comes in and fills that void, because we all are aware, as amazing a technologist or product builders you are, like the community and the color and the texture that's created in the work that like lives there is such an important part of like captivating that future. And you guys, like, I think derive that so naturally with what you do. Like, I think that's what stops me from being like, you're leaving music behind. You guys are technologists now in a full-fledged flight. Like, I think it's such a fantastic mixture that you bound. And I guess I'm curious just to like how that is existing, like how you're finding time for both. How do you kind of continue to chase the kind of next frontier and still commit to a musical practice, still an artistic practice? Like, how do you guys like ever consider giving it all up and just becoming fantastic digital minds? Or how is it all together, I guess? And we'll get into the AI stuff, I think, as soon as that's over. I apologize for, we'll be finally caught up and understanding up to date. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm retiring my musical career and becoming a VC. No, I'm just kidding. Actually,
you heard it here first, folks.
I think Matt and I have been kind of straddling, for lack of a better term, these different kind of fields for so long, like whether it be academic, music, art, whatever, that we've always been kind of a little bit of orphans in a way, like kind of moving between spaces. So somehow, even like the whole NFT moment, that kind of helps, that almost helped bring things together a little bit, because it was like things could kind of occupy the same space in a way that was much more separate before, all in this kind of like online space. And so I'm trying to, we're both, we've always kind of seen everything as part of one practice that just has different formats of release. And I think we're trying to continue down that path of seeing it, there's like a very distinct kind of perspective that we have, especially towards machine learning. And that can manifest in the form of an album or an NFT collection, or now in the form of a company. And so I don't know, they're all somehow pushing in the same direction, all with the same kind of ideas behind it, but they just manifest in different ways. But certainly it's difficult to find time for everything. I mean, the thing that I feel most alienated from is probably the traditional album, single, release cycle, tour, video, whatever that we kind of came from a more traditional music sphere. But that was already broken, that was already kind of like on life support. And then COVID came along and just totally, revealed what was already kind of not working for most people who need to take time off for family or for medical reasons or whatever. It was like almost impossible for kind of like a healthy lifestyle. So honestly, in a way, COVID kind of made a lot of that really visible. And so, yeah, still going to release albums, still going to tour, but I want to do it on my terms and not to try to make it to some weird industrial reality that doesn't actually serve the artist or the community.
Yeah, I was about to say that. I mean, we're also kind of like part of maybe a transitional generation, right? Where we're a little bit older in the sense of like, I'm in my mid-30s, like, I like TikTok and this kind of stuff is still an alien landscape to me that I hold no judgment over, but it's just not. But like, where it's really odd in the sense that like you have these 20th century infrastructures and 20th century industrial realities that we use to categorize artists, where like, I mean, I see Ruben here listening, for example, like great case in point, right? You're like, most artists are just artists, right? They have ideas and they want to do stuff in the world. And in the 20th century, it was like the way that you got to see some of them was, through the vessel of like an album or a film or a book or something along these lines. And it's like now we're kind of like what 15 years deep into social media where you're kind of following how people kind of actually make art, which is they're curious about stuff, they're talking to people about things, they're sketching this thing, an idea for a show, and then maybe they might want to put it down on record for people to listen to or whatever. And it's like all the infrastructure necessary to complement how people actually work is only just really being built. Like everything else is kind of skeuomorphically kind of replicating a 20th century industry that has deprecated, that has kind of declined in its relevancy. Like, and the other side I'll say is like, the people I look up to, I mean, I always bring up like Erkki Kurinemi, who like maybe some people, if you don't know who that guy is, you should absolutely check that guy out. And he was like a really, really early, like pioneering electronic musician. He also developed software. Like he developed like Ableton on like an Ableton like piece of software on like a television set. He like worked for Nokia because he wasn't making, I assume, a lot of money from his artwork. He was also like a pioneer in thinking about some of this machine learning stuff, to be honest. And I'm like, both Holly and I, in a way, have like a deep reverence for that particular tradition of musician, where people were stepping outside and building their own tools and coming up with their own theories and ideas about things. And that was never really captured by the music industry. These were people who, at the very best would end up kind of housed in universities getting paid just to think about things. But that's the tradition maybe we come from a little bit and still try to honor, actually, is I think I'm very grateful for a lot of those 20th century artists who had these expanded practices that didn't quite fit anywhere. And the great hope is that now, there are tools being built to complement those type of artists. The NFT moment and other kind of primitives or pieces of infrastructure that are being built right now, I think really complement that kind of mode of creation, which to me is exciting. To me is very exciting. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to get into the meat and potatoes. That was incredibly resonant. I feel like what technology has unlocked for the last 15 years, era of like social media, has allowed us, just like you said, to basically be post-industry, to transcend those previous like benchmarks of success, of exposure, of consumption, of creativity. And the thing I really wanted to pick your guys' brain about today is machine learning. It feels like if the last 15 years have sort of been this like ride to this new space where we're transcending these sort of industry barriers and able to build and be creative, like, and connect with each other in public, and these tools empower us to create more than what would have ever been possible without their existence. It sort of feels like machine learning, more publicly in the last year, but obviously like really for the last 10 years has come in and really poured gasoline on the entire situation and sort of set it ablaze and forced this timeline now to move much more rapidly, with the introduction and sort of like memification of things like Dolly and Midjourney. It feels like suddenly culture is even evolving faster than it has before, and art practices are evolving faster than they have before. I'd love just like to start with, as we get into machine learning, your read of the scene right now. The last 6 months, if you've been an art, like a generative artist or a GAN artist or a visual like AI artist at all, and you've watched for any like more than a year, and you've watched the last 6 months play out, you can feel a shift in the wind, a change in the scene. What's your take on that?
I feel like we're at the very beginning, like just the tiny, tiny tip of the giant iceberg that will explode, in our creative lives. I mean, the thing that's so kind of radical about machine learning art creation is that it's inherently co-creative. So you're kind of co-creating with a kind of like general internet hive mind, usually because it's scraped from the internet. But even if it's a kind of like custom training set that's being used, it's usually kind of shared with other people. So it's this kind of inherently co-creative new way of making things that I think begs the question of how we think about an artist's role or art generation in general. It kind of asks us to question all of our kind of preconceived notions of that, which is really exciting to be able to co-create with like the past and the present and whatever we put out to be something that could be co-created with in the future. And also this ability to be able to perform through and as other people. I think it's often portrayed through deep fakes and things like this, really negative things that scares people. And of course, that is really scary. You want to be able to verify identity and all that kind of stuff. But it's also really exciting. That's one of the things that we've been playing with a lot with the Holly Plus project is, this ability where other people can like almost kind of jump inside of my resonant body as through me and as me. Like that's just so weird and exciting. So what does it mean when we kind of have these really flexible identities that we can, hopefully permissively allow people to kind of jump in and out of one another and perform as one another? I don't know. I think it's about to get really, really weird and really collaborative. And I find that exciting.
Yeah, I can add to that too. I mean, I think, yeah, the kind of generations that are coming from these large models, right? Like a DALL-E or some of the stuff that Google's been doing with Palm or GPT-3, it's like, in a way, it's difficult to say this because this is like the necessary step that it took for, I think, people to take this stuff seriously. And they're obviously incredibly impressive, but as Holly said, I think this is like the demo phase. This is like the tape music phase. This is like, in the next couple of years, it's going to get better and better and better and better and better. And what's actually been kind of cool seeing, let's say in the last year, like the second you could prompt, all of a sudden people started to care. And we can say this, having worked in the space for a long time, the generations maybe 5 years ago just weren't good enough to really present. They weren't good enough to really for people to take them seriously, and the prompting, the connecting the clip to one of these generators, putting it in people's hands where they can actually kind of be like, oh, this is weird. This is, oh, wait, what? Like this is new. He's doing so much legwork, I think, to educate people on just what's about to happen. And I say this with caution because I do understand, like, there's also a lot of people who are really sick of like futurists being like, the world's going to change. And I'm like, sadly, and also for the better in a way, it actually is here. Like this is actually a really big, and all media is going to be generated in some way related to this right now. So it's actually really good that people are getting their hands dirty and like testing things out and seeing how they feel about it. That being said, of course, part of the reason why we're looking to start this organization kind of advocating for artists in this is that there's a lot that needs to be worked out for it not to turn into into something into something maybe that would be aggressive towards artists. But I think the good news is that most people we've spoken to who are working on this stuff are all motivated to actually see this work out. Like everyone's kind of sitting there being like, a year ago we didn't realize that these techniques that we're using, if you just put more data and compute, like throw more data and compute at them, they're actually way better than we thought they would be. And so everyone is actually in this kind of cautious mode of being like, okay, like what do we do with this insane thing, which is exciting. And I mean, Holly said this in a previous thing I remember, but like, kind of similar to what's happening in the crypto space or the Web3 space, this kind of energy of all of a sudden being, well, if we weren't super happy with how creative economies worked or IP or copyright or any of these things, whoa, like actually there's this whole new suite of tools where we get to just kind of rewrite it. And that, like, that's crazy, like, again, coming from a background, like, an artistic background where I admire, like, I like looking and pouring through old articles where people were talking about, like the early days of synthesis or the early days of sampling or the early days of the internet for that matter, right? Like the early days of dictation. And it's like, this is our time to do that. Actually, in 50 years' time, I mean, I don't know how it'll be published, but in 50 years' time, this is the time where, where people coming around and actually determining new protocols for how we're actually going to do things is really, really consequential. And that's like, at the same time, it's very, it's a huge responsibility, and like everybody needs to jump in and like develop an opinion about it, but it's also crazy exciting, right? Like, again, to go from what me griping about Web 2, I didn't see Web 2 as that. Web 2 felt, Web 2 felt it didn't quite feel as open or as consequential as this. And so yeah, so it's really good that people are getting educated. It's really good that people are developing basic concepts of what's going to happen. And the next step is to, like, again, develop a strong opinion about where you think you sit in all this, and start working toward that. Yeah.
Amazing. As you said, incredibly exciting, and incredibly privileged to have you guys here. Just crossing the halfway mark of our hour here. Level setting, everyone, we're back with new arrivals. Holly, Matt, so happy you joined. Everyone check out the link here, as well as join us on foundation.app. See some amazing work they've done for us. Infinite Images with Us Classified. Incredible. You guys are just generating in all sizes, shapes, forms, colors. It's beautiful. And I'll hand it back over to our resident GAN sensei, Kit. Just excited what you guys are getting into. I feel like you can't stop. It's going to go on.
I feel so limited by Twitter reactions, because both what Matt and Holly just shared, like, literally gave me goosebumps, and I want to be able to react, like, all caps, yes, screaming. It's so resonant, but I limited. Just know when I pop this little heart off, I'm screaming inside. I think that comparison is so spot on, right? I find myself looking at simultaneously what's happening in Web3 and what's happening with machine learning. The closest technological frontier that I can compare it to is the microcomputing revolution. And I think it's really similar in terms of vision too. Like, something, Matt, you just shared, which is that people almost don't understand the tools that they have in their hands, that this is, as Holly said, the tip of the iceberg. When the microcomputing revolution happened and people were starting to bring computers into their homes, like in the early 80s, late 70s, one of the first things that people were really upset about was they were like, oh, well, I can do business on a computer, but if I don't have hard copy printed on paper, then it's never real. It doesn't matter. And I feel like we're in a similar place right now, where we're like using old benchmarks to try to navigate this new world. And we have this tool in our hands that is so powerful that we can't even see the full potential of the tools that we're working with. And that is both terrifying and incredibly exciting. I think it's the reason why we're all here. One thing I wanted to get a take on from you guys is, in this emergence of sort of, I think, prompt writing and like machine learning becoming more accessible, being able to say something to the computer and have it output an image and have this collaborative dialogue. We're now starting to see the emergence of a new identity of artist. And that's sort of an artist calling themselves a prompt artist or a prompt engineer. I have mixed feelings on this topic for a number of reasons. It gets into all kinds of complicated layers, but I'm curious around ownership and around creativity and outputs. I'm curious, what do you guys think of this new emerging type of artist? Is it really that new?
I'm waiting for Holly to speak first.
You go first this time. I always go first.
Okay, fine. I think the ability to generate, satisfying images from text and a corpus of data is very new. I also agree. I think when it comes to prompt artists, it's this really fine line, right? Where, like, on the one hand, I don't think it's, I think it is a different category. And I've heard arguments that are really disparaging of it, and I don't fall in that camp, where I think, look, like, people, like, lowering the barrier for people to get close to expressing what's on their mind is a good thing, period, right? Like, I don't think, for example, that someone being able to prompt something changes the value in like dimensional painting or something along these lines. At the same time, I also do think that in my mind, probably the person most deserving of the title prompt artist or prompt engineer would probably be an artist who were able to develop a style without maybe referencing the name of other artists. That would be like an interesting experiment. Like, what would it look like to prompt a system where you weren't allowed to use real names or something like this? Like, that would be really interesting because clearly, like ultimately what is going to happen is these tools are, I think we wrote a long piece on this called Infinite Images in the Latent Camera, and the part of the idea of that was like saying, look, like, this is kind of a bit like when cameras became a thing. People use cameras in lots of different ways. There's going to be people who focus explicitly on training their own bespoke models and become like model artists, just as there most likely will be people who use language in a very expressive way or something like that in order to evoke images. So I wouldn't be disparaging of it, but yeah, but if anything, as I say, I just default back to saying, like, more people caring about art by the process of them participating in it and actually making stuff ultimately is good for art. And I think I'll die on that hill. I think that's the one big takeaway of all this, is that, like, lowering that barrier to actually be able to express yourself. When you do that, you inherently also develop an awareness of when someone is really, really good at something, and so that's why I think some of the maybe vitriol about whether a prompt artist or engineer is a legitimate category, we can debate about that, but a lot of it's coming from this idea, which I think is a falsehood, that that people just generating stuff are ultimately going to displace artists. I just don't think, or people who would traditionally be referred to as artists. I just don't think that's true. I think that there's always going to be a way for one person to stand out, and over time, the tools that we use change. Like taking a snapshot on a Kodak camera in like 1920 whatever means something different to everyone having a phone in their pocket with a camera on it. It just does, and as a result, we're also going to change and shift our parameters for what kind of art we value and how we consider the artist in general.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. I mean, what we as a society think an artist is constantly shifting in relationship to the culture of the time and the tools of that time. Like, I think music is a really great illustration for this because, back in the day, if you couldn't imagine a full orchestra arrangement in your head or plucking out at a kind of piano, then you weren't considered a composer. And today you can use like free software and a sample pack and you're a composer. So you're constantly shifting. And so I don't like to tie like specific kind of craft or skill to the title of artist. Conceptual art kind of, answered a lot of those questions for us in the last century. And artists have been removed from the kind of labor of creating their own physical works for many decades already. And as Matt said, artists are in the kind of business of meaning making. So exploring these tools and understanding what they mean. So not just doing the kind of like surface level. Maybe that's where some of the hesitation comes from. Is some of the prompt works right now feel like a very kind of like early engagement or not fully thought out conceptual kind of engagement with the tool. That is, just super common in a kind of like nascent field. What I do think will be a challenge is that these tools also accelerate the ability to mimic artistic styles and artistic kind of signatures that have been developed over a lifetime or over, years of kind of toil. That becomes then very easy to emulate. And so I think that will be a bit of a battlefield. I'm not kind of an idealist in thinking that that's all going to be fine. I think that there will be issues there, and it's important to acknowledge where ideas come from. And that's one of the reasons why Matt and I are working on this new organization to think about how artists can kind of have ownership of their models and things of that nature. So yeah, I think it will be a bit of a battlefield, but ultimately, I think the more tools, the better.
Yeah, I think that, again, not to be like a nerd obsessed with the microcomputing era, but if you also look at like early computer art, if you look at like late 80s, early 90s, when like early paint programs started to come out, the first thing that people tried to do was replicate paper textures and like their oil paint process and their watercolor process. And you still see that prevalent in some art today, but it was also, I think, the nature of encountering a new alien tool for the very first time. It's like you have to start somewhere. And so my hope, I think, for prompt art or for this kind of art is that we're really just seeing the very first like 0.1%, the very beginning. And as you know, with computer art and media as it's evolved, it's become obviously you know, magnitudes more creative and explored a lot other styles and types. I do think, though, that the style preface in prompt writing is really fascinating because it gets into really complicated questions around like ownership and identity and creative process. I want to bring it back because I want to talk about this new project you guys are working on. We've watched you sort of work through this conceptual idea with Holly Plus, almost decentralizing yourself and making art like through Holly becoming this like collaborative process that almost anyone can kind of take the wheel and work on. It sounds like this next step is almost creating a tool that allows other people to decentralize their own work. Can we hear more about it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. We're joking about it as being like everything plus. I mean, in the sense that like, the reason Holly Plus was kind of like the focus on what because we were like, okay, well, Holly owns this IP, so we can be really, really cavalier with experimentation here and actually test some of these ideas out. But it's kind of our belief that everyone ultimately is going to make similar decisions to Holly. And so figuring out the infrastructure for that is a really interesting challenge, particularly also when you factor that, like, one of our main principles is long-standing principle is like no one size fits all, right? I don't think that the way that you assuage concerns over this next phase in how people create things is by a couple of people in Berlin being like, this is how everyone's going to make money in future. Like it's not that. I think that really the fundamentals are, people need to take ownership over what they create, and set permissions and figure out exactly how comfortable they feel. And the good news now is that we have way more tools to do that in a really detailed way. And so that's kind of the idea is like, again, we kind of get the opportunity. It's maybe a short window of opportunity, to step forward and say, actually, the best way possible to run this, it's going to be bumpy and there's going to be all kind of conflicts and strange things that we maybe haven't anticipated, or even like boring things we have anticipated that are just unavoidable. But fundamentally, on principle, people who are creating art, and if somebody else is making profit from that works, and you can trace that profit, they should be sharing in it. And this is one of the basic principles that I always found very compelling about a lot of NFT marketplaces, including your own, right? Is just this idea of being like, there are secondary sales, right? Like there is an attributable source back to the original, and so if someone's making money, that artist should be making money, and that was a big leap. And we need those kind of robust principles for stepping into what this thing's going to be, because the ML thing, again, I don't want to be that guy that's always hyping things, but honestly, there's been points where I'm like, I want to go out on the street and just put my hand on people's shoulders and just be like, by the way, like, this is a really big deal. Like, it's not like if no, genuinely, like,
no, every day, same, of course.
If someone's being glib to you about it, or giving you like one or two boilerplate answers about why this is bad in some kind of, it's like it almost doesn't matter. It's like there's a window of opportunity right now to kind of at least attempt to get this right, and it's a really big deal. Like, and yeah, so that's for us, at least with the art practice, we're just like, well, we've kind of got to this point where, like, how many people can we talk to about it? We can go to newspapers and like talk about it, you know. But at some point, someone actually has to build the thing, and like, and if anything, you know, the one thing I've learned at least in the last 10 years is that generally it's the people that build the things that tend to drive actually to drive the dynamics, and so yeah, so that's it's part of the art practice, but that's why.
So lovely to hear, and yes, so lovely to see you shout about it, because I think like as you're growing Holly Plus and all these DAO sentiments, it was really just impressive to see you guys take the time, going through press, going through media outlets, and obviously like you guys are darlings. I think everyone is offering that microphone. You have your own microphone via your own channels, which are just incredible and resourceful, and like you say, so build oriented. I think taking that like kind of stubborn stance and talking to anyone who will hear about it seems like such an incredible aspect of like how you guys are flying that flag. And I sense that as well, like it's a sustained use of it that we really acknowledge and appreciate, because I don't think we have this sort of like NFT market roll red carpet. Holly's got a new NFT. Like, how often can this be possible? How often do people put out albums and singles? Like you're commenting on this kind of like parade of promo that existed in the past. I just wanted to acknowledge how lovely it was to see you guys come without like warning, upload a few classified images, launch the infinite images work. Like everyone should check out foundation.app right now. On the homepage, you can see these great bodies. How is it feeling now? Like, how are you guys considering kind of adding to your and just overall, like your paint bucket here is so tangible and real. And I think that's something we always hear about in the bear market. It's like building, right? Like everyone's building. You guys are building so much from your own resources versus using this manifold contract via foundation. Like, how is that? I just think it's really natural to see you do it. I guess it's more of an acknowledgement than a question, but yeah, it was really incredible. I guess understanding that pacing of how you guys have found yourself back at it and evolving this kind of system.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we never kind of like stopped. It's just like the kind of frenzy of the market might calm down a little bit, and in a way that's kind of welcome. You know, I feel like during the whole frenzy of the bull market, there's also a lot of people who feel so much anxiety around that time, because it's like people have crazy FOMO, people are worried that they're not doing things fast enough, and so it's almost kind of nice for things to be a little bit calmer and for people to be able to take their time and be more considered and less kind of hypey about things. So for us, we're just kind of continuing the work that we were doing before, and yeah, just very excited and happy that we have an audience for what we're doing. Feeling grateful.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. It's like, you know, I think when we first released some work with you all, we were kind of talking about this. It was like very early. People were like exactly feeling FOMO and anxiety, and it's like, look, like these tools aren't going anywhere, and the great gift of the tools in a way is that you can start to integrate them into your practice as you see fit. And so that's kind of been the principle, is we're like, okay, well, there's these options available now, which are really awesome. We can find an audience, the people who get what we're doing. And so actually at that point, our responsibility is to just stay doing what we were doing anyway, you know, and like over time, yeah, as I said, like we updated the classified thing because we said we would, you know, we the whole point of that project is that, you know, as new generators come out, we're going to keep querying Holly's clip embedding to see what these different models think Holly is, you know. And so yeah, so Dolly 2 came out and we're like, okay, cool, like let's just keep doing that. There's going to be more generations later. We'll cap it at 80, and it's like, yeah. So I think
just to shout out, check out number 46 because it's so fucking weird. Yeah.
Oh, is that the Holly Park one?
Yes.
Oh yeah, that one's. We might actually get in trouble for that one, but yeah. Yeah, but that's the point. It's just like there's no rush at all, and actually, like feeling like there's a rush can ultimately only damage the fidelity of what you're trying to accomplish. And you know, we're in this for life. Like we have a very specific idea of what, you know, of what we're interested in. We've been very fortunate and lucky that there's been people who've also found that interesting. And so yeah, our job now is to just keep doing that work. And yeah, so it's a real joy. It's a real joy to be able to do that. Yeah, to be able to do that and have people interested. It's a great privilege.
Magical, inspiring words. I think there's so much inspiration really afoot with you guys. It's hard to put a finger on just one moment to wrap it up. I know we're ending an hour and we only have so much of your time. It looks beautiful. Obviously, looking forward to Helsinki. Summer in Helsinki is inspiring as hell. Inspiring as hell that Classified Collections just nearing the 100 ETH mark. It's just fantastic watching you guys grow over the last year. I just want to open the mic. We like to, at the end of these conversations, say, is there anything you didn't get to that you want to speak about further? If not, then just words of wisdom and inspiration that maybe others listening are going to take from anything you could do over again, hindsight learned in your practice over the last few months. You feel like sharing, we're really open and interested in just kind of how you guys are thinking about stuff of all angles. It could be anywhere, shape, or form. So, yeah, thank you so much.
I'm waiting for Holly again. I'll say thank you. It's really nice. It's really nice to catch up. And yeah, I don't know, words of wisdom. I think generally speaking, my perspective on these things, I think I touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's like pursuing doing artwork is a really complicated thing, and it's not easy, and like you'll end up spending a lot of time working. And so I think fundamentally, like figuring out what that core is, like what you're curious about and like what you really want to spend your time doing, is probably the biggest gift you can give to yourself. And so that's the exact opposite of feeling FOMO and feeling like I have to participate in something because other people are doing it or whatever. Like that's the biggest, because over time we're we're like well over a decade into this. Like over time, that's kind of like that's the fundamental note that you can kind of rely on. Is like, okay, you have a practice, like the reason why you were doing things, which will become more valuable now that people can automate art or whatever. The reason why you're doing things is always going to be that thing that you rely on. And so yeah, taking the time and just being nice to yourself is like probably the best thing you can do.
Yes, being nice to yourself is important for sure. One thing that I find really exciting about this space and this time is that so many people who are kind of labeled as musicians or visual artists or whatever are now, I don't know, showing that they're like these crazy multifaceted multimedia artists. And I think that's so exciting because people are able to really show multiple sides of their creative output and their conceptual output. So I love that things aren't quite so siloed anymore, and I hope that veteran people feel more empowered to do things outside of what maybe they've been labeled. So that's what I'm finding really inspiring right now. Yeah, and of course, like thinking back to like our first release on Foundation, I was so terrified of the idea of a public auction. It was like the scariest thing on earth. And now I don't know, I've just kind of gotten over that fear, and it's actually fine. And this whole transparency thing is actually really cool. And so, yeah, if you have not done something and are considering it, scared, and also if it doesn't work out the first time, it's also fine to, to fail and try again or do something else. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you guys, covering all sides and bases. Yeah, and inspiring to see that. I think like Kayvon would have a single tear of joy knowing that the auction model has protected and built such like illustrious sales here, and you guys have certainly like gone to show that yeah, it can catch and transparently transact and show your work in so many different kinds of ways. It's amazing to just watch it grow, and we're really excited to debut a lot of new stuff. As we said, like building. There's some exciting new ventures to come from us, and we can't wait to see how you guys will think about them too. So yeah, without further ado, we'll wrap it up. New arrivals here, Charles and Kit from Foundation. Matt, Holly, thank you so much for joining us, taking the time out. It's incredible to reconnect. It's been damn too long, and yeah, we can't wait to see what's going on in the near future. All those exciting projects sound so great. Everyone check out foundation.app, check out Holly's profile, follow these guys on Twitter, everywhere they talk and speak. It's lessons to be learned. You guys are the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you all. And yeah, hopefully in person sometime soon. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Deal. See ya. Have a good one.
Thanks, y'all.